Hi, I'm Mike Lanzone, President and CEO of Cellular Tracking Technologies. Today I'm going to go over a little bit about how to put on life tags and harnesses on many species of birds and show you the different sizes, different types of antennas, and some different strategies for putting them on songbirds. Let's get started. Here we have a couple of different things. We have some 3D printed harnesses, some Stretch Magic, and some different sizes of antennas that are commonly used on transmitters. So the Stretch Magic is a really common material that's used in leg loop harnesses. With this, you can either use Stretch Magic. Some people also use different types of cotton. For this demonstration, we're going to be using some Stretch Magic. These are 3D printed harnesses. These are relatively new. We started using these for shorebirds, but they have a lot of really good properties, and one of which you can make the harness any shape or size that you'd like. And you can see here we have different sizes, kind of like a band size, and they're numbered from size 0 all the way up to size 20. And you can just see there's 3, 2, 7, and 12, and see the relative sizes of them. The different types of antennas that we have here on the table, typically from the smaller songbird antennas, which is fairly thin, all the way up to some more stout antennas. These are used in raptor species or other bitey species, and then pretty much everything in between. And when you're ordering transmitters, the different size antenna that comes on them, you can pick whatever size you'd like to have on there, depending on the species that you're working with. All right, so this is a LifeTag. This is the version 2 LifeTag, and the nice thing about this is it has a lot of different adjustment hole options on it, depending on your attachment type. This particular tag is a heavily potted tag. You can see the epoxy coating this. There's different versions of potting. It can be anything from a simple conformal coating, which generally protects it from any moisture, all the way to a heavily potted one like this, which should be really good in any kind of environment over heavily budding birds. The antenna, like we talked about before, can be any size you want. This particular one with a lighter nylon coated antenna and a heavy potting with the entire adjustment harness is 0.8 grams. And this will vary depending on, obviously if you only use part of this, so you're cutting it off of that white thing, for instance, the white line, it's going to be about a tenth of a gram lighter than using the entire thing. So when you get your tag, you'll notice a couple of key things. One, the top of the tag has a solar panel, and so it's really important that the bottom from the top, when you're putting this on the bird, you make sure that that solar panel is not only on top, but also fairly clear from feathers. And using the different holes, you can actually move the position of it up and down, and I'll go into that in a second here. But the top of the tag, all the tags will ship with an ID. Write this ID down, and this is the ID that will be picked up by the receivers. So we're going to take this off and go ahead and start to show some different options. All right, so we're going to do a simple leg loop harness, and for this example, we're going to use Stretch Magic. There's several different types of materials you can use depending on the type of attachment that you're doing. But simple leg loop harness, the general technique is going to be the same. And for this example, we're going to be using a paper bird, just to show the general technique. And so typically, depending on the species, you're going to have a varying length of Stretch Magic or other material that you're using. And especially if you're when you're starting out, you want to make this a little bit longer than you think you need, because if it's too short, it's really hard to tie it. So for this example, we're just going to cut about 12 inches. And this is something that can be done long before you get to the field. And for larger birds, you can actually spread this out if you'd like. So you could have one side of the leg loop harness going through the top and the other through coming back through a different section. And this can be widened or just use part of it depending on how wide the leg base is. And so this is really uh, pretty versatile type of a harness. Okay, so we have our 12-inch piece of stretch magic, and the first thing you want to do is find the middle of it. So you're basically going to fold it in half, mark the middle, and I just twist it a little bit, and that's going to create a slight mark there that I can keep my finger on. And I'm just going to take this, put a knot in, and I like to do a couple of knots. And this is a 0.7. You'll find if you use a really thin diameter stretch magic, you'll have to knot it a few more times. But I usually do about 2 knots in this weight. And you want to do a couple more probably for the other, smaller weights than this. Stretch magic does, you'll notice when I'm pulling this, it like bounces back. So a way around this is, holding it like this, putting a dab of super glue on, taking a little, if you have a little bit of water, that you can just take and you just dab it on, it instantly dries, or baking soda works too. And then you just pick your harness. And for this example, I'm going to be using this hole for the upper holes and this hole for the lower. And so you put this through, and that knot is going to sit right in between those 2 holes. There you go. So the knot's sitting in between there, and the knot will keep it from sliding back and forth. If you'd like, you can also put a dab of super glue right there. If I were attaching this to a bird and I knew that that was where I wanted this to be, I would simply cut off right at that white line. And you could, similarly, any, section you decided to use, if it's larger, you just cut it a different line. You could also cut this off. If this wasn't potted and you were gluing on, you could also cut it off right at the tag. So we're going to, for prepping these for going into the field, simply take the other end of this, and it's going to go through the same side and the hole straight back. So, and you'll create loops. There you go. And so one thing I'm going to do is double check. It's always a good idea to double check that these are the same length. Even though we already measured it, we already did everything else, what you'll find is just because of the way this knot ties, they're going to be a little bit different. So center the knot and just take this and bring it up like that. And you can see there's a little bit of difference. So what I'm going to do is just cut that off. This just ensures that these are exactly the same size. If these are different, you're going to have different size loops on the sides, when you put it on the bird, and you're not going to know. So I would put this just like this in my banding box, and put it back in the bag. And now it's ready to put on a bird. You don't have to do any of this when you have a bird in the hand. So you catch a bird, you're simply going to take this leg loop like this, and keep in mind, right now we don't have, this isn't pre-measured. So you can actually, if you know the species that you're working with all the time, these might already be pre-measured, and you might already have this knotted back here. So these loops will already be exactly the size you need. In this case, we're going to size it to this bird. So this may be a new species that we're working with. So you take your bird, and you're going to simply lay it on while holding the bird. You're going to take one leg and put the one loop around. Now these legs don't move like a real bird's legs, but generally speaking, the thing that you want to keep in mind is, I'm going to show you the tag here. See how when you're holding this, see how this is crossed. You want to make sure that it's like this when you put it on, because if you're holding the bird and this tag is on, I'm going to put this around the bird, but then what's going to happen is that's going to be twisted. So make sure that you hold those underneath your finger like that. That way when you put the bird down and start putting this on, it's going to actually be straight and not twisted. So you get this around the bird's leg, and taking your finger, just kind of hold these in place temporarily, and reach around the back of the tag and just pull them tight. And one thing you're going to do is, the birds, way their legs fold in, sometimes the leg loops will get caught around the upper part of the thighs. And so you want to make sure they're extended a little bit and pull it again just to make sure that they're fairly straight and tucked in between that fold, not wrapped anywhere up above the thigh, because it should sit nicely in that fold. So once you have that fairly well, you're going to turn the bird around and note where the tag is sitting. Now the tag should be sitting, depending on the holes you have it on here, but it should be sitting anywhere from the upper part of the tail to in between the wings. And one of the problems with leg loop harnesses for solar powered tags is sometimes they sit down far enough that the primaries will actually cover the solar panel. Now this isn't a huge issue. These tags beep a lot. So, if you happen to miss a couple of beeps because the wings are folded, it's not the end of the world. It gets so many beeps that when the bird's flying and foraging and moving around and even sitting, it's going to get enough light that it's going to beep at a slower rate, but it shouldn't be a problem. But this is one of the reasons why we use the other type of harnesses, which I'll show in a minute. So when you get to this point, you're going to double check that the lengths are the same. You're going to then loosely tie this. And the reason why you're just putting a light knot in here is because we're going to double check this again. And the other thing I should note, I mentioned this was 12 inches. So one of the things, and so I'm doing a double knot and just loosely. One of the things we're going to do is measure the tags after we're done putting this on. And that way for the next one, we're going to know how long or how much material we actually use. You're going to turn the bird back around and holding it in the bandage grip. You're going to basically just take one leg, hold it, double check the fit on both sides. And once you're confident that it's not caught around any other part of its leg, it's perfectly in that fold, you're going to turn it and finish this. And one of the issues with Stretch Magic is that it doesn't tie knots really well. That's not a huge issue. And the reason why is after you do a double knot, you can do a triple knot here if you want, but simply holding this tight. So if you're doing this by yourself, and I do recommend working with somebody else, especially for your first few until you get this size. But if you're working by yourself, you're just going to hold this tight, take a dab of super glue, put it right on there, let it harden, and it takes literally a second, because you can just put a tiny bit of water or spit right on that super glue. It'll harden in a second. So at this point, we have the harness is completely on, the super glue is on there, you're confident that everything's right. It doesn't hurt after you get everything on there, just to make a quick double check, make sure everything's good. Pull the legs kind of forward and back, and everything looks good on this. So you're going to cut the tag ends off. I usually leave a tiny bit, so you don't want to cut it super tight. Just leave, maybe a couple millimeters on either side, and then you're good to go. You can release the bird, and like I said, these tag ends here will tell you. So you take both of these, and it'll tell you two things. One, it will tell you for the next time how much you can get away with cutting off. We had this originally 12 inches. There's approximately 5 inches or probably more, probably almost 6 inches of material left here. So, with all the knots and everything else, we're only using probably a little bit less than half of the material we cut. And so if you're prepping these in advance, you can save a lot of your material by only using what you need. The other advantage is once you actually size these things, you can actually go into the field and have this. So this would already be super glued, ready to go. The loops would be already sized, and then it's literally about 10 seconds to put on a tag. This part will be cut off already, and the tag end, so you just have those loops, and then you're just simply doing only part of the process. Putting one leg through, putting the other leg through, clearing it, making sure it's good, turning it, checking the fit, making sure everything's good, double checking, and releasing the bird. It's literally about 10 seconds. Is it going to be 10 seconds for your first few? No, but you should be striving for that. And when you have this for whatever species you're working on, size properly, it's going to be very easy. Now that we've gone over leg loop harnesses, we're going to go over some 3D printed harnesses. And as I said, there's different sizes. We're going to use the smaller size for this demonstration. But the basics about these are they're a smooth nylon material. They can be printed in a lot of different shapes. We printed the most common shape that we use in most of our work for these types of transmitters, and that is a modified belt style. And the belt meaning this is a straight piece here, and this will go around essentially the lower, this will be the lower keel, and this will go straight underneath the wings on either side. And this straight, quote unquote, belt locks in the feathers and it keeps the harness from folding up. These were originally designed for shorebirds, and the reason what made them nice is this: when they're actually on the bird, and I'm going to show you here, so the bird's head will be sticking out right through the holes here. I'm actually going to get a harness that's sized for my paper bird here. So when this is actually on the bird, the top part here, this goes through the top part of the transmitter. The bottom part here goes around here like this, just to get your bearings here. And then you adjust the belt size to be about, maybe 5 to 10 millimeters of being, about how loose it is. And this will go through, and this back part is back from the neck a little bit. And the middle part here, these bottom part, the belt part attaches to the bottom part of the transmitter. The upper part of the straps attach to the top part of the transmitter. So these were originally developed for shorebirds, and the big thing with shorebirds was they gain and lose a lot of weight. So you have a shorebird that comes in, especially for the to the Delaware Bay, it comes in at like a sanderling, for instance, will come in at sometimes 50 to 60 grams, and they're leaving at over 100. And one of the things, sanderlings, red knots, a lot of species of shorebirds that migrate a long distance, what will happen is the gain and loss of weight. If you put a traditional style harness transmitter on, what will happen is these straps, because they're sized to the bird at the time of capture, if it's really light, they're going to get too tight. If it's really heavy, they're going to get too loose and fall off the bird and potentially cause an entanglement. So we developed this so as the bird gains or loses weight, what happens is this: the front of this pushes out as it loses weight, and as it gains weight, it comes in. And this doesn't sit tight. It always has a millimeter or so of give when the bird is at its heaviest point, and when it's lean, it will move out a little bit. We tested this harness on with the size the same, many different weights of sanderlings, and they all behaved normally. We had birds come back after a year and showed no ill effects from this transmitter type. So and it works really well. We've also now tried it on many other species, and it does a couple of things. One, the harness is a really nice material. It's also easy to make a harness that doesn't have a lot of knots or other pieces of some people use crimps and other things. It doesn't have anything that holds it together. It's really simple, and that's important. The other thing is, unlike a leg loop harness, this allows the transmitter to get a little higher. And when you do that, you're putting the transmitter more in the center of the gravity, and also the solar panel is up away from the wings, and that's important. So let's go into putting this on a bird. All right, so here we have everything we need to put on 3D printed harness. The couple of things that you use, I like to use small heat shrink tubing. So there's a couple different sizes here. This is just, they're almost the same size. It's a little smaller. There's really no difference, but sometimes you buy them like this, sometimes in a longer tube like this. We have our pack of number 3s, and so depending on the species, you're already gonna know, just like a band, what size you're going to need. So we have that. We pulled one out. So I usually keep a little jar of heat shrink tubing that's already cut to the right size. You can use a pair of scissors or a pair of wire cutters. I kind of like to use wire cutters just because they cut a little nicer. And so you get a nice quality pair of wire cutters, and that works a lot better. Wire cutters also work a lot better than scissors to cut harness and work around a bird, because you don't have long tips and you can open them up really small a bit and cut without having, longer blades, kind of sticking in behind trying to cut around a bird. So they work pretty nice. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is start to prep the transmitter. We have our cut pieces of heat shrink. We're gonna put them on the harness. So all 4 legs of the harness here, we're gonna put these on. And most of this you're gonna do before you even get in the field. And so you'll have these things already prepped and ready to go. So, all right, so that's all of them on there. Like I mentioned, the same thing with leg loop harnesses. With these, you're gonna figure out the size of this that you'll need. And similarly, the size and area that this will go through. For a really large species, you may put it on up here and it may come down, so it brings us down in the center of gravity. For a smaller species, you're going to be working close to the center. This particular harness is the same size harness used for many small to medium sized songbirds and shorebirds. And so I would use some of these holes up here depending on how far I wanted to get this transmitter down. So remember, the solar panel needs to go up. So when you're putting this on, there's 2 things you want to keep in mind. The first thing is you want to keep any pointy things away from the skin of a bird. And so when you're putting these, and I'm going to go through the end of this so you can kind of see more exactly what I'm talking about here. I wouldn't be putting it in the end of this transmitter if it was, on a small bird, because this would be way too long. But so you're going to put this through the top 2 here. And what you'll notice is this. When this goes down, this is going to be sitting on a bird kind of like this. And so this will bend up around, and after it's cut off, it's going to be sitting with the cut off piece on the upper side. So then you just put this through the heat shrink tubing on both sides. And also the other important thing is, you can put this on like this, so this has more of a leg, or you can pull it tight. And I'll show you here in a second. For a lot of the smaller species, I'll actually put it right at the base there, and I'll actually pull this so it's fairly tight, and I'll show you. So I'm gonna just pull these 2 tabs, and I'll bring it right to the base, and that's all you need to do. The tag ends here, so these 2 tag ends will get cut off. And so what you do is you just lift that leg up, you put a tiny bit of super glue in there, you put it down, you take your wire snips, your wire cutters, and cut that off, and that will give you what you need. And these are heat shrink tubing, so if you have slightly larger, and depending on the size harness, I usually pre-shrink these down, so I'll actually put them through a spare harness and double up the harness, shrink them down, and then you can use them that way just with a heat gun. You can use a lighter, but using a lighter is a bit harder because it just melts this material. So then you're going to do the other side, and for this demonstration, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend this, I don't want to cut this tag, but I'm going to pretend this right here is this part right here. And so this is going to curve around and go through the second holes, so the holes right behind the one we just were working on. And you're going to do the same exact process. You're going to curve it around. It's away from the bird. Now all this is done up to this point pretty much off the bird. And I'm going to show you a harness here in a second and how to size. But for those of you that have made your own harnesses for small birds, you'll know how time consuming that is. So this really cuts a lot of time off. And there could be other methods for putting this on here. I'm showing you this one just so you can see how it's put on. But these heat shrink tubing, there's many other materials you can use potentially. But this does seem to be an easy way to do this. And so when you're done, this harness will have, I'll go ahead and cut these off, but so these will be cut off. And I would cut them off pretty good. You'll have super glue underneath of these. And the other thing you would have done already is, because these are pre-measured, you're going to have little black marks on that. So you're going to know that they're already the same size. So when you end up with the harness is going to look pretty much like this, with these tag ends on the top side. So the solar panel, remember, this would be right down here. You could also put it on like this for some species. I can't think of an application that you'd ever want it this high. You probably have the base down farther, but this arranged kind of like this would have the solar panel here on the upside. All of these tag ends will be on the top and away from the bird, and everything on the bird side is going to be nice and smooth, and that's pretty much it. So that was the brief introduction to putting on leg loop harnesses and 3D printed harnesses. You know, we're happy to help guide you. Keep in mind, this was just a very basic video, and you know, we kind of assume that you already have experience handling birds and that you've probably already put on harnesses. If that's not the case, you know, we can work to help find you the right training. You know, this shouldn't be used solely as the basis for putting transmitters on, just as a guide to help you in your path to putting transmitters on and putting transmitters on differently and effectively. Anything we can do to help, we'd be glad to help. Just send us an email and ask. Thanks very much.